Hey, everybody, welcome back to Wild Connection, the podcast, where we explore the deep connections between humans and the natural world. I'm your host, Dr. Jen, and today I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Susan Eirich, author of Whispers from the Wild, An Invitation, Stories from the Rescued Wild Animals of Earthfire Institute. Susan's work in reconnection ecology also invites us to see animals not as other, but as beings with whom we share this planet in a profound and reciprocal way. In this conversation, we'll explore the wisdom that comes from truly listening to nature and how that shift in perspective can transform not just our relationship with the wild, but also with ourselves. This theme is at the heart of my upcoming Audible course on reconnecting with nature and my soon-to-be released workbook, Rooted in Nature. Both are designed to help you cultivate a deeper, more meaningful bond with the world around you. So I look forward to sharing more about that in upcoming episodes. For now, settle in. This is a conversation that might just change the way you see the natural world. Welcome to Wild Connection, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jennifer Vertelen. I'm a scientist and author that studies animal behavior. I'm passionate about animals and exploring the complexity of their lives, their intelligence, relationships, families, social connections, and emotions. I also love helping people reconnect with nature to live better lives. This podcast is about you, other animals, and how we're all connected in this wild and crazy thing called life. Welcome to the show. I'm really excited to talk to you. I'm really moved by your book, Whispers from the Wild, An Invitation, Stories from the Rescued Wild Animals of Earthfire Institute. And before we talk about your book and Earthfire Institute, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background and when you first realized the strong and deep connection you have to nature and to other animals?
I remember I was about age 6 or 7 when I was arguing with my mother about why animals didn't have equal rights to humans because it didn't make sense to me. So I'm not quite sure. Somewhere back there, I took a side trip because society said you're supposed to do certain things with your man or woman. So I took a bit of a side trip, but my connection with nature was always there. And I finally, when someone invited me to raise wolf puppies, that was the end of it.
Now, before you had that opportunity to raise wolf puppies, which we're going to talk about, what was the primary way that you connected with nature before that?
Hiking, camping. I got a PhD. I got my degree in biology, my love of nature, but life takes you in strange pathways. And I got a master's and PhD in psychology, which took me away a bit, except for always feeling I was part of something larger. That was just always with me, meaning part of nature. And then I realized that while I really loved psychology in the sense of truly trying to understand us humans, what we need, how to make us fulfill our real potential, I loved it. But I realized that I loved nature more. So I ended up decided to change careers, so to speak, and ran a nature center for a while.
Yeah, talk to me about that. Now, is that what is known as Earthfire Institute today?
Oh, that was way back. That was for I changed careers when I came back from teaching overseas. I got a job with the Nature Conservancy running and doing a master plan for one of their preserves. Founding Earthfire was directly related to the wolf puppies.
Yeah. So how did that start? How did, kind of paint you describe it so wonderfully in the book, but kind of, if you don't mind, painting a little bit of a picture for the audience, because it's not every day that one says, well, everything changed when I started raising wolf puppies.
I didn't exactly raise them. I was invited to help raise them.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'd always loved wolves, again, since I was a little girl. I remember running around at a playground pretending I was a wolf, 8 or 9 at that time. And I have no idea why. I just always loved wolves. And I didn't think he could have one. And then I discovered that there was a woman at that time who just started raising wolf hybrids. It was new at the time. And I said, that's it. I can't have a wolf, but I certainly could try to have a wolf hybrid. I got one and then ran around the country. Not exactly. I drove many thousands of miles around the country to meet every single person who had one because I wanted to do right by that animal because at the time, and it's still true, that it's not a wolf and it's not a dog. What do you do with it to honor it and treat it right? So I went around the country meeting everyone. And one of those people was my current partner. So that's how we met in the end. As soon as I met him, he was like an animal himself. He connected deeply with any animal. He became the animal. As soon as I met him, I realized that we needed to do something together because I could speak verbally about my deep connection. He just was it. And he could handle. He trained wild animals in a beautiful, positive, intuitive way for movies. And I thought together we could start Earthfire. But before that, in that process, he had some wolf puppies that he'd gotten from a movie set and invited me to help raise them. And I don't know about you, but if someone invites you to raise wolf puppies, would you say no?
Well, for me, it'll depend on the context, but in that context, no. The answer would have been a resounding yes.
So I dropped it. So I just dropped everything and helped him raise the wolf puppies, 7 wolf puppies, and one of them. So I spent a lot of time trying to name them because they were so completely, totally magical, and I don't think they were unique. They're just magical because they were ones that I knew, but the wolfness in them was so magical. It took me weeks to try to think of how do you name these creatures of love and light, Moonbeam, Dreamkeeper, and one of them I named Earthfire because she felt like a particular maternal, female archetype quality to her.
Yeah, I was curious about how the names came up. I'll kind of share in a moment my favorite story of because you go through in the book Whispers from the Wild all the different animals and individuals really, and you talk about their story and their life, and I think that's one of the really powerful things about the book is, and I've always believed that is that it's one thing. Okay, I study animal behavior and I'm supposed to write papers, and that's great, and I do that. But I get to know individuals, and even back when I was studying prairie dogs, there were a few. I mean, I had 1,000, so that was tough, to get to know all of them deeply. But there were a few that I still remember. There was definitely Antonio Banderas. He was a very handsome prairie dog. And then there was Christmas and her daughter Tinsel, and then Easy, because he just seemed to not mind me or the trap, or he just was a laid back, pretty relaxed prairie dog. Then there was Nervous Nellie. And, so I remember those individuals and I named them, based on certain qualities. And now I study mountain gorillas, and for sure, there's a lot more. It still takes time to get to know them. They're named by others. The trackers name them, and they don't name them quickly. They get to know them. Sometimes they're named for a place. Sometimes they're named for a personality. Sometimes they're named based on a physical feature. And so I was curious how you came to name these individuals, and what were the traits that kind of guided you in choosing some of those names?
Well, Earthfire, as I mentioned, had a very maternal quality. She would try to stop the other gently. She was very gentle and tried to stop the others from fighting each other, as wolf puppies do right from the beginning, in terms of dominance, Dreamkeeper had an otherworldly quality to him. I just felt that he was the keeper of dreams. He was not all of this earth. Autumn Dancer, there was a quality, not exactly of sadness, but whatever the feeling is of an autumn, where it's a change in seasons, the beginning, end of the year. So as an autumn dancer, he had these long, exquisite legs, which was where the dancer came from. Moonbeam, I had someone come while I was bottle feeding them, and she wanted to hold a puppy. And she picked up Moonbeam, and when a puppy doesn't want to be held, a wolf puppy in particular, they're like a Houdini. They just start moving their boat. It's impossible to hold them. And she just squiggled her way out, no matter how she was trying to hold it. And she exclaimed, "My God, it's like trying to hold onto a moonbeam."
Oh, I love that. I love that. And now there's Mariah, right? Also
Yeah,
known as Piddle Paddle. And
yeah,
I was really moved by that story in particular because it reminded me, break the surprise here, but of a baby prairie dog that I named Thumper because it had been paralyzed. Basically, its back legs had been paralyzed, almost certainly from a bicyclist that had carelessly run over her. And I considered, with the help of a veterinarian, intervening and, making some kind of wheelchair back leg thing, and in the end, I didn't. But what I really admired about her was she was spunky, she was feisty, she didn't put up with anything from any of the other prairie dogs. And, she had a really big personality for a young baby prairie dog. And so I was wondering if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about Mariah, also known as Piddle Paddle.
Oh, it's a delight and a joy to me to talk about any of them. Invite me anytime for any of them. So Mariah was born as an incredibly athletic being. She was like an Olympian among wolves. The grace and the agility and the ability to leap, she was just absolutely incredible. And then one day she leapt off of a rock onto some icy ground and slipped and instantly became paralyzed right then and there. And it's a death sentence to a wolf. So the shock, it says her belly started to bloat. And it said as we rushed her to the vet, we saved her, but she was completely paralyzed in her hind legs. He said, "Put her down." I said, "No." He said, "She's got no movement. What are you going to do?" So I brought her home. And for 9 days, she lay there not eating. I thought she was going to just waste away. I don't know how much time we have for the full story, but basically, my partner came back with a young puppy, German Shepherd puppy, and 3 baby bears. And that's the whole long story. And I have this picture in the book of this. She was just fading away as this white wraith. She was a white wolf. She was just fading away. I had her on the bed with me. I was trying to get her to eat anything. And she heard this commotion outside. And suddenly she perked up. And something made her decide she wanted to live. I have a picture, just these bright-eyed, curious wolf eyes looking over a partition because I had her separated. Like, I don't know what it was, my partner coming back or the excitement of whatever it was. So we let her out in the main room, and one day, but she was still totally paralyzed. And one day I saw this tiny little twitch. I thought maybe I imagined it, but maybe a tiny twitch. And she started to pull herself together, and she would start to try to walk. She was an incredible athlete. And she started to try to walk, and you could see the efforts, and we would hold her up and try to help her. And slowly she began to gain enough strength that she could pull her legs under herself, so to speak, and walk a bit like a camel. She'd lurch forward on one side and then lurch forward in another. And then we let her out to play outside with the German Shepherd puppy we brought. She had come out. We let her out to meet him. And there's a split second where you can see if an animal is going to attack or accept. It was like within a split second, she decided to accept him, and they were inseparable for the rest of their lives. And we'd let her out to play with him, but she would drag herself because she couldn't. Her back end would drag along the ground. I tried everything to try bandage, and no bandages stayed on, whatever. And she kept on opening it up, her hip up right up so you could see the gleaming bone underneath. And I'd bandage her every day, and she'd drag her hind legs, and I'd bandage them every day. And she was so patient. She'd let me wash out the wound. She'd let me do the bandaging every day. And eventually we decided we'd just get a wheelchair, which she understood immediately. This is a wolf with a wheelchair, immediately understanding what it was. I have pictures of that too. And she slowly rehabilitated herself. She eventually was able to actually jump up on her hind legs, from her hind legs. I promised her when she was lying on the bed, and I loved that wolf. Of course, I love them all, but I loved that wolf. And I promised her mentally, if you recover, I'll let you run in the meadows like the wind, And And she did. She ran lopsidedly like the wind.
Well, the wind, can be a little crooked sometimes.
But she ran. It was just, she had a will.
Yeah.
Like your prairie dog. She just had a will to live.
Yeah.
And I find that you probably have that experience with your animals too. Domestic animals, I love them equally, but the will to live is stronger in a wild animal, in my experience.
Yeah, and I guess I would add to that, and thank you for sharing that beautiful story. And it's sort of symbolic for me in a lot of different ways. I think that I would agree that there's more of a resiliency, I would put it maybe, in wild animals. But once they decide no, then it's no. When they resign, it's finished. And so I love that you saw that in her and respected that in her and created the conditions and the space for her, because obviously in the wild, she would not have survived. And I think that there's so many stories that you tell that have these parallels, I feel, to human experience and that show those similarities we have. And I think, you and I'll take the liberty of saying I'm very similar in that I always see that connection between humans and other animals. And I try to reconnect people to that, right, through what I do. And that's also what you do. And I want to just, before I kind of ask a little bit about rehabilitation as having a wildlife rehabilitation center versus a sanctuary, I just kind of want to stay on that theme of those parallels, because you also regale the readers in Whispers from the Wild with stories of grizzly bears. Now, to be fair, I don't know much about grizzly bears, right? I know a lot about a few animals, but I was really taken. It was the first one, Teton Totem. Okay. And I was taken by that story for a few reasons. And one was the way that you described that he didn't like being talked about by visitors. And that resonated with me because I see the same thing in mountain gorillas, certain individuals, not every gorilla, but certain gorillas are just, they find it irritating. And you talk about that, how he sort of felt irritated when there were people there that were just sort of talking at him or about him. And the other was that he had some fears and anxieties. And so I feel like a lot of people might be surprised that a grizzly bear could have fears and anxieties. And since this is a theme I've been working on for my next book, I would really love it if you could talk a little bit about anxieties and fears or nervousness about certain situations, and what were Teton Totem's triggers for that?
Teton, like the Teton Mountains, Teton Totem. Totem of the
Totem. I don't know why I'm stumbling over the name, but it's,
The first thing I would say, you used the word irritated. I would use the word insulted.
Uh-huh.
He felt insulted. Like, not only was it, he was a big, absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous bear, and a personhood, if you will. Mm-hmm. And he really got annoyed. So people would come. First of all, I don't let general public come.
Sure.
It's always a custom visit, carefully curated, so people understand it's a matter of they're coming to meet these animals, but they can't help themselves. They see this magnificent bear, and they've never, you're next to this big, gorgeous bear, and who's ever been next to one before? So just the human nature, our human nature is, oh my God, and look at those claws. And, do you meet another human being and say, oh my God, your fingernails, So he didn't like being looked at. And I would try to prep people saying, come and meet these animals as beings. They'll be insulted otherwise, but we can't, it's not anyone's fault. We can't help ourselves. It's such a stunning experience.
Sure.
So that would be bad enough. But then when they would start talking to each other,
yes,
is he an elf? Is this, etc. He would actually sometimes just take something and bang it against a wall. Like, he was just pissed off. Some other animals are more delicate not, is that the right word? Another animal might just turn around in disgust.
Yes.
And go back into their den. So as you would say, every one of the main experiences I had all these years living with all these different animals, every single one is an individual.
Yes.
Every single one within the same species is an individual.
Yes.
Dramatically different. So we had another bear who was extremely shy. But so first of all, he could get insulted and let people know very clearly that he was insulted. And I would warn them, say, he's going to have a temper tantrum. It's not pretty. Then they would understand. But yeah, bears in general are scared of windy days, but he in particular. So we discovered that. So we have them in enclosures because of the strict laws in Idaho. And then we have a big garden for them to play in during the day. And if it's windy, they won't go out.
Wow.
It's scary. If they stand up and make that huffing, it's that they're nervous, they're uneasy. What sense of the wind's bringing?
Oh, I was wondering what it was about the wind, but they use their sense of smell so much. Yeah. So that's what you think is what's disturbing them.
I think so. And then we have the gardens with a hot wire to make sure that as extra safety as we let them out. And he'd be terrified about going through this open space. This is difficult. This was him. Another bear could trudge right through without any problem. Not the hot wire itself. There'd be an opening that they could go through, and then we close it after them. So he was a cautious bear. We had another bear. This is Humble Bumble bear. We gave him an egg thinking it would be a treat. And for some reason, it scared him. And he backed into a corner and looked at it for a while. And he finally got the courage to creep out of his corner and reach out his big bear paw to touch it. Now, if a bear paw touches an egg, now that can be incredibly delicate, mind you. But in this case, Humble Bumble actually wasn't a delicate bear. and this is why he was named that way. He broke the egg. Utter panic. Back into it changed. It could have attacked him for all he knew. Back into the corner. And for the rest of his life, we couldn't give him an egg.
It's interesting because I've studied personalities in other species and this response to novel things. And just like with people, you have some really curious and sort of risk-taking, if you will, individuals. And then you have individuals like Humble Bumble who, and also being startled by something for the very first time. Obviously that set him on a path to not liking or being comfortable around eggs. Now,
abject terror. Yes.
Okay. Abject terror. Well, and so I think this is what's so wonderful too about the book is that you reveal these special insights. And aside from, obviously, you and I agree, other animals, individuals are individuals. And they have their own quirks and personalities, preferences, and who knows whatever else is going on through their beautiful, complicated minds any more than, for us. I can't know anybody else's mind but for whatever they tell me or whatever they reveal to me, and then I interpret. So we're in that similar position when it comes to other animals. They communicate a lot and they tell us a lot. And sometimes we get it and sometimes we don't, or sometimes we think we get it and sometimes we don't. But I'm curious, what other insights did you discover about grizzly bears? Because they're a bit enigmatic in the sense that people don't often have such direct experiences with them. And when they do, they're not necessarily, leading to the best outcome for either person or bear. And so I'm wondering, through Teton and the others, Humble Bumble, what were some of the other insights you discovered about grizzly bears that surprised you?
We have animals here that we can't ever be released. And so we spend their whole lives with them. And under those circumstances, you interact with them daily. And here, it's always on an intimate basis. We're not a zoo at all. So we interact with them on a level of individuality and respect. But what happens over time, what happened with Teton Totem in particular, is he began to figure out how he wanted to communicate across species to humans, which was completely astounding. He would start to make, I would call it the American Sign Language. When he wanted something, he would put out his paw and pull it back towards him, basically saying want. And then he would try to communicate what it was that he wanted, in addition just the idea of want. In this fall, we would give them large amounts of hay and leaves and stuff so they could make their own den. And he would start to go around his enclosure, again, that they had for the night. And any type of leaf or twig or whatever was in there, we'd reach out and pull it go towards Jean, my partner at the time, and pick the leaf of the thing and start to drag it towards the opening of the den, constantly looking at Jean, saying, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want. Also, through his eyes, he was communicating energetically, just the feeling of want, as he was actually pantomiming it. Or if he wanted an apple, which he loved, he would make the movement, because he would eat an apple, he would take an apple, and he would use his third claw and pierce it to split it in half, and then use it like fingers. He'd use a claw and he'd put it into his mouth to eat it. He would make that motion when he wanted an apple. And then he began, if he wanted water or a toy. So it began to get more and more sophisticated over time. So it's like, what fascinated me most wasn't just that he was capable of it, but that when a human and an animal in this case bear anyway, spend time together, you begin to intertwine a little bit, and you begin to understand each other. It's like your brains intertwine a little bit. You begin to understand each other, and you become a little bit more bear, and they become a little more human, and sort of,
Yes.
But he figured out how to communicate across species. And actually, that's happened with other animals since.
Yes.
And animals that you would never think of. It happened with a porcupine, of all things. And I shouldn't say of all things at all. That's totally insulting to the porcupine.
I was going to say, on behalf of the porcupine.
Yes, but I'm saying it because that's how people would look at a porcupine.
Of course.
Rodent. No, we have a porcupine who's quite insistent upon what he wants and when he wants it, and is very clear in his communication. I was going to say, one of the things I began to see was the level of how they're capable of tuning their communication to another species. They have to understand that it's another species, and they have to get into the head of the humans to figure out what they want, and then how you do it with your own behavior repertoire, so to speak. It just becomes absolutely stunning.
Well, and it's so interesting because 3.5 years, I guess, since I don't know. Yeah, I hate to call him my cat because that seems like I owned him. But I was in a relationship for 18 years with a domestic cat named Mr. Buttons. When he died, he was Señor Antonio Botones Gatos, so he lived a very big life. And but at the end, when I had to let him go, and that was the best thing for him, I remember the veterinarian afterwards, she said, I've never seen two individuals communicate that well. Like, I knew him, he knew me. And I will say this, he was very demanding. And so what I'm noticing too is a lot of species, once they figure out how to get us to do what they want, boy, are they persistent in what they want. And you're right, they're very clear, and they're quite demanding about it, and they're very impatient about it.
Yes.
And I always wanted to say to him, look here, be patient. I just need a cup of coffee before I open the patio door for you. And in the end, I ended up setting a timer so that the coffee was already made, because there was no waiting. Like, there was just no waiting. And so you also describe, it's not just the communication with us. And I was reminded of I saw this video, I think it was a raven. And, there's lots of now data on ravens and lots of studies, but this particular raven, because it was related to the porcupine, had 3 porcupine quills stuck in it, and it approached a human.
Yeah, a wild raven, yeah.
Yeah, and requested help basically by squawking. Yeah. And the person, fortunately, was like, okay, let me help this wild raven out. And and the video is really spectacular because it obviously hurt when the quills were pulled, and it never bit the human. And you could hear now the human talking to the wild raven, like, okay, there's just one more. And then at the end, there was a final squawk before it took off. And we see this a lot. Wild animals approach humans for help. And
yes,
with the gorillas, it's really interesting. You have habituated gorillas, which are used to people, and they will often use trackers as a shield to wild gorillas because they know that the wild gorillas won't breach the line of humans. And then there's also true of bears. So brown bears in the Nordic regions, and yeah, they use humans as a shield. So the female brown bears use the human settlements as a shield from male brown bears during the cub season. And so it's really, the fact that that there's anybody that is unsure of the consciousness and the capacities of other animals, and the awareness that they have about so much is stunning to me. And you talk about also the relationships you've seen form between bears and other species at the sanctuary. Can you share a little bit about some of the interspecies relationships that you've seen that aren't human, but are actually across species? You mentioned the wolf and the German Shepherd, and people might think, oh, well, that makes sense. But were there any unusual friendships?
Yeah, I had two unusual friendships between a bear and a dog, two different bears, two different dogs. They were just profound. A Humble Bumble was a terrified bear. Everything scared him, not just the egg. And so it took us a long time to build everything that we wanted. So we had him in an enclosure as we were building a large garden. And once we had the garden ready, we wanted him to go out in it. No way in hell. He was not leaving his safe space.
Yeah.
But he had a close relationship with the German Shepherd we had. And the German Shepherd would understand his fear. And the bear, this huge bear, I have a couple of pictures of it, this huge bear saw this little German Shepherd, comparatively little, as his mentor and his savior. And the dog would on his own, because the dog understood that we wanted him, his name was Rodney, that we wanted him to, we wanted Humble Bumble to go out. So he would come over, and Humble Bumble would be extremely happy to have him there, and he would lay himself just a few feet out of reach and get Humble Bumble to move a little bit. And then he'd move again and move again. And then between where the enclosure was and the new garden was a bit of a dip, which apparently looked like a Grand Canyon.
I was going to say a ravine, something really awful.
That was it. And he wasn't going to go any further. It was just too scary. And Rodney would keep calm and encourage him and go again, and finally get him to go out into the garden. And he was so proud. Humble Bumble was so proud. And then we had, because he was not that coordinated, we had boulders, so to help him to go from one boulder to another. And Rodney would show him the first boulder and show him, and Humble Bumble would very bravely climb on a boulder and then go on to the next one. And again, the level of pride when he was finished is just like he was beaming pride. And that was because the dog deliberately, carefully led him. He was a trusted companion.
You talked in the beginning about how you kind of took the scenic route to where you are and having started Earthfire Institute, but you have a degree in psychology, which you mentioned. And I'm wondering, how do you think that has helped you recognize the connection and kinship with other species?
Not sure my degree in biology and psychology helped, because at that time, now it's getting a little more, you have eco-psychology and that kind of stuff now, but at the time, it was all completely human focused. And even when humans studied animals, they did it from a human perspective. They didn't tune in. So it was more my biology background, I think, that I just sensed the connection, that we were simply a little more, and evolved isn't the right word. Brains were further along on the spectrum, but you could sense. And now all the science is really strong about it, that the emotional part of our brain, the structure, the chemistry, all of it is the same in mammals and humans. So I was simply fascinated by that. And then recently I did some more reading on the work of Frans de Waal, whose work was unequivocal in terms of the idea that emotions are not only they're not uniquely human, their basis is quite far down the evolutionary scale. And they were simply more, I don't know exactly.
Contradictory and complicated, I would say.
There's no such thing as a unique human emotion.
Of course. And actually Darwin was the first to put that in writing.
Yes, absolutely, he was.
And then everyone decided that was not true. And, we've spent 200 years almost trying to undo that.
It's the intersection for me between biology and psychology that fascinated me. The connections, and that we're really basically the same, except we are able to do AI and math. But they can do a primitive form of math too.
Oh, sure. And I think that squirrels do physics constantly. I mean, and even other, think about
abstract thinking.
Yeah. I mean, but a lot of people can't do calculus or geometry or trigonometry either, Yeah. So, and we go to school for it. And so, whenever I've seen some birds and some squirrels miscalculate, and, and only if they're fine do I giggle a little bit, because, I've watched some ducks come in for landing, and you're like, oh, I don't think that's going to go well, but eventually they make it just fine. So I guess, I kind of want to not really switch gears, but Earthfire Institute, I'd love to kind of talk about it a little bit more, because I don't want to give away all of the secrets of Whispers from the Wild. And I want to leave something for readers to discover and continue discovering. Probably need to read it more than once, because there's so much richness to it. Earthfire Institute is got a few different arms, and part of it is wildlife sanctuary, but there's also wildlife rehabilitation. So it's a certified wildlife rehabilitation center. What determines whether an animal can be rewilded versus needing lifelong care in a sanctuary?
Governed by extremely strict laws in Idaho, which actually is the main determination. But if an animal has been captive bred, it's extremely difficult to rehabilitate it. But it's a little different in the state of Idaho, because we're not allowed to rehabilitate a lot of the animals.
Oh, okay.
Sadly, they would rather shoot them. So we're not allowed to, any of the large predators, we're not allowed to rehabilitate. And generally speaking, the animals that we do rehabilitate come from the wild. And if we determine that they're physically able to return and make it for themselves, then they're released. And if not, unfortunately, the laws are very strange here in Idaho. If they can't be released, they must be euthanized. We're not allowed to keep them.
Oh, that's hard.
We work really hard to get them rehabilitated. Yeah, it's the same state, their attitude towards a lot of wildlife in general.
Sure, especially as you mentioned, large predators, and so that I would assume would include bears, cougars, wolves.
Yes, we're allowed to rehabilitate all the smaller mammals.
Okay,
but not the laws are very strict, and it's kind of boring to get into them all. We can't do ungulates.
Okay. It's interesting. All right. I didn't know that. And I think that's one of the things that, and I know on the website, you have very clear, I think, and I bring this up because a lot of times people want to help if they see, a wild animal that's injured or hurt. and they don't quite know what to do. And
Yeah.
so, what I really appreciated is that you provide, call this number, do this, and give people resources. Because I know migratory birds and raptors are another, kind of specialty group that has some strict rules around it. I guess a sanctuary and a wildlife rehabilitation center is also very different than a pet. And from my point of view, the exotic pet trade is a pretty horrible business, and it's the animals that suffer. And do you ever worry that, because you have some wonderful photos in the book, but do you ever worry that when people see the way you physically interact with these animals, that they get the idea that they can as well, and that they should own or have wolves or bobcats or cougars as pets?
Do worry. It's a very fine balance, because if you want to help we humans understand who these animals are and their capacities, you have to show that.
Yeah.
And but there's no controlling that. Right in the beginning of the book, that I say that these interactions are based on people who have done this professionally their entire life, are completely committed to the health and well-being of the animal. That if you do this without that level of commitment for life to the animal, this always comes out badly for the animal. So I have that in the beginning.
Yeah.
Maybe it should happen on every page. I don't know.
Well, no, it's just a conversation, because I know many people own big cats and they own, primates, and
Yeah.
it's a really
So it's an honest and an important and difficult question.
yeah.
My focus is these animals are incredible. Look at their capacities. Let's save land for them. So my
Yes.
focus is always on habitat biology and land, not on let's make this a pet. So that's what I try to do, and I imagine it's going to go wrong sometimes.
No, I think you're doing that very well. It's that sometimes when people see photos or they see people physically interacting, I get this question all the time in the wild. People ask me, "Oh, do the gorillas climb on you? Do they touch you?" And I'm like, no, and I don't want them to, right? They may be used to people in the sense that for the most part, they don't mind. They're visited once a day for an hour, and the rest of the time I'm usually the annoying one that's there, but they don't mind me so much. I don't poke a camera in their face. I never take photos of them as much as possible, or record, unless there's something really interesting happening. I don't record video, because I noticed that they get irritated, annoyed if they're constantly being filmed. And
They sense it. Yeah.
yeah, they do, and they don't like it, and they will turn away in disgust. Or I have one named Mariah, who just gives me a look, and I find myself ashamed. Like I'm sorry and apologizing. So I noticed that people, and I'm not judging so much the desire to be close, because I think that it's motivated by that sense of kinship that we all feel, right? Like there's something inside that compels. And so I think that some of these situations with people and bison, that happen every year, or other wild animals, it's a bit of a, and I guess I'd love your opinion on it. I feel like it's a kind of a misguided attempt at experiencing connection to encroach on the physical space of another individual. Right? Whether it's a person or another species, we should have consent to.
Fully agree with that. I'm a little less generous than you.
Okay. I'm being very, yeah.
In my mind, it's number one, really selfish, and you're just lost in a total bubble. You have no clue. You're just doing it for your own gratification. You haven't a clue that this is another being. Yeah. And in a sense, it's a major tragedy for the human to be living in such an impoverished world where you can't connect and see other, and have the richness and the beauty of of just not physically interacting, but energetically interacting and understanding. This is another incredible being on the face of the earth with us.
Yeah.
It's coming from a position of being so lost and so needy and trying to grab things without the things that won't give you any satisfaction. So I see it as fundamentally a tragedy.
Right. Well, and I agree with you on the selfishness, and I think it's a way to try to self-soothe this sort of emptiness that people feel by violating the space and the rights of another living being, but they don't see it as an individual with its own rights and needs, wants, desires, preferences, and but what advice would you give? Because I think there is, for many people, not for everyone, a real sense of something that pulls them toward that experience. And so what advice could you give people who want to feel close to do so in a respectful and appropriate manner? Right? What is the way for them when they see another species, wherever they're seeing it, to have a sense of, what would you advise for people?
I have a little bit of difficulty with two things there. When we use the word people, what do we tell people? We're separating us from them. And we're objectifying people as opposed to us. We're also people. So I like to use the word, what would we advise us to do rather than people?
Okay.
So I don't, because then you're in a position of this us versus people, and I as an expert giving advice to a people, as opposed to one human being versus another saying, I found that this works. It's more like trying to communicate with each other on an equal level. So the underlying thing that I have found worked is quiet, tune, and time. Sometimes it happens really quickly, like a split second, and there's a connection between you and another animal just because the universe's forces align. But the animals respond to quietness and to listening. It's a nonverbal connection that's made. The chatting, when people come here, and not just with the bears, but if they'll come and they're watching the wolves and they're talking to each other, which one's the alpha, etc. There's no tuning in. What kind of experience are they having? As opposed to if they're quiet and the animals tune to that quiet level, and then we can have a connection. But just to try to drop the human tendency to talk, and to be busy in our mind and ask questions and just to be, and then connections can happen. And that often takes time. And that's not something that we are comfortable with or have much freedom to do in our society. Everything's so rushed.
Yeah.
But the very is slowing down and breathing and allowing information to seep in, because it can't seep in if we're busy. And then amazing things can happen, because my feeling is that all living beings are receptive to one another. And actually, if it's positive on some level, wants to connect. We're interested in one another because we're all different forms of life. And it's just really kind of interesting. So if you quiet down enough, it leaves the opportunity for the communication to happen, for the energetic exchange or whatever you want to call it, the tuning into one another.
Well, and I appreciate you suggesting that it's us instead of people. That's also why I try to be really careful and always say other animals instead of people and animals, because that does effectively the same thing. So, we are animals, even if we don't like to think that we are. Between us and other animals. I definitely have had, obviously I sit and watch and am quiet. Often I'm by myself. Now with mountain gorillas, I'm not. I always have trackers with me. And, for safety reasons, I'm not ever really alone with mountain gorillas. But there are a few, I'm quiet. I don't ask. I'm not talking to anyone. And I've noticed that I sometimes feel as watched as I'm watching. And one of them in particular, I have a yellow notebook that I always have with me. And I notice that I feel this sense of curiosity of what is that one doing always with that notebook? Why does she look at me and then write things down in the notebook? And I also have had the experience where I felt uncomfortable with how do I put it? The strength and the depth of the gaze. And I can't tell if I was being judged or not. I felt a little bit judged somehow by this gorilla.
Uh-huh.
And I felt, I don't know, it felt disconcerting. I think it was just the intensity of
they think for themselves. Of course they make judgment.
Of course, I know. And I felt like it wasn't a good one. And I was just like, I don't know. I want to know, like, you're really, really intense on me. And I don't know. I want to know what you're thinking, but I have no way to know. And there just seemed to be this look of like, I don't know, disgust about me, not me as an individual so much as just whatever I represented.
Yes.
And so, I know we're coming close to our time, but as you know, this podcast is called Wild Connection, and everything I try to do is about reconnecting people with nature to live a better life. And
nature,
and so Earth Fire Institute promotes reconnection ecology. And so can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Senses that our fundamental capacity to be connected with nature, well, it's silly. Our language is silly. We are nature.
Right.
But for lack of a better framework, we're automatically connected when we're born. So I use the word reconnect because we lose it quite early, compliments of the society, etc. Allow ourselves, it's the same thing as you said, well, another word I was going to say, not just be quiet, but approach another living being with respect.
Mm-hmm.
They respond. All the animals here respond enormously to respect versus being looked at. It's a matter of respect as well. So it's reconnect. And then I find so many people have these profound experiences with nature early on or later in life, and then dismiss it because they're stupid. They've been told it's stupid, it's crazy, it's not true. The scientific worldview is the only one, and they tuck it away. And they forget it. And so I hold these online and workshops, storytelling workshops, not workshops, sharing sessions where I invite people to, in a safe space, to share these stories. And these incredible stories come out. And then so the second element of reconnect is to trust the truth and the importance of these stories. And that's, if we lived from that type of connection with other living beings, we wouldn't have any environmental problems. We couldn't and wouldn't do the things we do. So we're taught not to trust it. So it's to reconnect and trust. And I really try to support that in all of us when we have, no, this is actually, it's happened. It suggests another level of reality beyond the one that we're limited taught. And then to act from it. So it's reconnect, trust, and act. Whenever act you do is personal. It doesn't matter. It's based on the connection you have, who you are, what your skills are. But once you have that connection, it's almost immoral not to act on it.
Sure. I think you talk about in the book how disconnection from nature is at the root of all of our difficulties. This really resonated with me, and I just finished recording a course for Audible called Reconnect with Nature, because I agree with you that it's in us. We are nature. I mean, the idea that we're not, I find strange. However, our contemporary society and everything about it mutes that. So there's like a dial, the volume is down completely. And so for me, reconnecting with nature is just turning that dial up again. And so I'm wondering, have you ever experienced that disconnection in your own life? Or is it just something, because to say that, either you've experienced that or you have observed it. And so I'm just kind of curious how you came to recognize that fundamentally feeling or being disconnected from something we inherently are is really a core challenge that we're facing.
Never been disconnected. I always felt connected. So it's more like observing how, and then trying to feel through, not just intellectually, but feel through. How is it possible that you can burn down a whole forest? How can you do that? How can you shoot an animal? How can you torture an animal? How can you raise the animals the way you do in in agricultural farms? How could you do that? You can't do it if you're connected.
Right.
You can't. It comes from a disconnection and separating what you're doing from your own capacity to observe. I think it wounds our souls.
And you have experience with indigenous communities. And, one of the things that I have noticed in many of my experiences is there is a kinship with, there's no belief of separation, right? That what you do to another, whether it is human or other, you do to yourself. Yes. And this is also, I think, where much of the suffering for indigenous communities that have been separated from their homeland, meaning their nature, comes from. But I also know that there are real human wildlife conflicts and, human other animal conflicts. And so there are challenges that come with living with other species. And I think that it's hard for people to understand how you can hate a gorilla, how you can hate an elephant, unless someone in your family was trampled by an elephant, or your entire agricultural crop for the entire year is gone, or because, clever, strategic planning mountain gorillas wake up at 3 a.m. and annihilate your entire banana plantation in about 15 minutes, right? And now you have no way to feed your family for a long time. And so I firmly believe that engaging with all kinds of us, right? And where we are in our, and prairie dogs, right? They're one of the most, probably second to wolves, right? I mean, in the U.S. are the most hated small mammal, and then wolves and, mountain lions would be at your top for the predators who are most reviled in this country. And so, engaging local communities in positive ways and addressing or trying to solve those conflicts can have a positive impact. And, I've met some sort of what we would call reformed ranchers, right? And I'm wondering, how does Earthfire Institute engage with the local communities around, I forget where you're located in Idaho, the particular town, but have you seen attitudes shift over time? Do you feel that your presence there and the work that you're doing has impacted, for some, their experience of some of these other animals?
That anybody who's come here to visit goes away changed.
Yeah.
And often profoundly changed. A small example, which is kind of amusing, was we had a fine black bear called Major Bear, and we brought him to a schoolyard, and we had a trailer that he was traveling in, and then we set up a hot wire outside the trailer with the backup of the brick wall of the school. So there was an area connected to the trailer, and then we had there were fourth graders all sitting very quietly, very nicely, as my partner Jean had the bear in there and was with him and talking about the bear, etc. And there were rules about how to behave, and they were all angelic. And a teacher forgot something, and she got up and started running to get something. And Major Bear took one look at her. And when a bear gets scared, which they do easily, actually, their noses get very long. and he got this very long nose and dashed back into the trailer for safety. because the person was running. Therefore, there must be something to be scared of.
Yes.
And so he dashed for safety. And the kids said, "Oh my God, I didn't know a bear could be scared like me." Whole different focus.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because the rules for mountain gorillas are completely different. If you run, they will chase you because you must be an enemy. Otherwise, why would you be running?
The wild is true.
Yeah.
With a bear, you don't want to run.
Sure.
In this particular case.
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine, well, see, I would think even in that situation, if a silverback charged you, you don't run. You basically look down and pray. And they will stop. They do. Sometimes uncomfortably close. And you just, yeah, and it's, and they're all different. They have different tolerances. Well, and, you mentioned that you've had people come visit. So first of all, where can people find your book? And then, what are the ways in which people do get to come and visit? I speak for myself, I'm hoping I can actually come visit sometime, but that's for others. How do people come and visit?
Book is available on Amazon. There's several books with the title Whispers from the Wild, none with Whispers from the Wild than an invitation.
Okay.
And then stories from the rescued wild animals of Earthfire. So it's available on Amazon. And it's available hardcover, softcover, ebook, and I'm in the process of doing an Audible book.
Great.
We have a big website, and on the website, Earthfire Institute, and the website is information about how to come.
Okay.
We do limit visits because it is a sanctuary, and because the animals here actually like people and want to come up and meet them. And that wouldn't happen if we have crowds. That wouldn't be crowds anyway, because every we focus on, and we don't do short visits either, so that people can come and actually meet. And the animals don't get exhausted by meeting too many people. So they're limited.
Yeah.
But we hold retreats. We are open for custom visits on that limited basis. And they can find that information on our website, earthfireinstitute.org.
Wow, Susan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything that you're doing to bring people back, to bring us back to a relationship with other animals, and also for all of the individual lives that you've changed. And I'm talking now about the animals, the other animals, and even us. I'm sure you have impacted people, others so greatly. And so thank you for your commitment, for your passion, and for sharing the lives of these individuals in your wonderful book, Whispers from the Wild, An Invitation, Stories from the Rescued Wild Animals of Earthfire Institute.
It was a pleasure talking with you.
As I wrap up this conversation with Dr. Susan Eirich, I invite you to reflect on the ways we can reconnect with the natural world, not just as observers, but as participants in a shared existence. The wisdom of the wild is all around us if we take the time to listen. In our next episode, we shift from this broad perspective of nature to our closest cousins, the great apes. I'll be joined by renowned primatologist and author Dr. Richard Wrangham. It's a fascinating discussion you won't want to miss. And hey, if you're enjoying the podcast, please give it a like and share it with your friends. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious and stay connected.